Through my younger years, 7 to 12, my mother dated a guy very on and off, which I think mostly had to do with him being in the Army and staying with his family in Laredo, Texas whenever he was home. Either way, he invited us to visit his cousin's summer cabin in Monterrey, Mexico for a weekend, so we did. The cabin was very ranch style, longer in one dimension and shorter than the other, so it was built like an architectural rectangle. On one far side of the building, think of this as an aerial view, was the kitchen, and next to it was the living room. Attached to the living room was a long, slender hallway, connected to the bedrooms on each side, and a bathroom on one of the sides. The backyard was only accessible through the living room via a sliding door, and it started as a bit of a desert floor which met forest tree lines of dead or dying Monterey cypress trees. Meeting the tree line was an elevated hunting tower, which had its platform meeting the top of the vertical tree line. On our way to the cabin, my mom's boyfriend was telling us about a cursed legend of the witches of Monterey. Apparently, they'd been haunting the mountainous area for generations, and they were his childhood versions of LilyLilnphi. Clearly, he was just trying to scare us from the get-go, and me being so young, I was eating it up like candy. We got to the cabin in the late evening, so we decided to stay in for the night and watch M. Night Shyamalan's The Lady in the Water. After the movie, my mom's boyfriend asked me to go get something from the bedroom for him, and as I was halfway down the hallway, he turned the lights off on me. Let me remind you, this was a very rural part of Mexico, so the dark was dark. And with all the scary stories and all at the time scary movie, I was spooked and I froze. My mom's boyfriend began to make your stereotypical ghost noises and taunted me to go deeper into the dark hallway. But I was so petrified, I remember just standing there, frozen in fear. Long story short, my mother got him and he turned the lights back on. They comforted me, and after a few apologies, we all went to bed. I can't remember how I slept that night, but I honestly wish I did. The next day, we did basic tourist shit. Went to a bazaar, embraced the city's beautiful mountain range, which seemed to hug the city. We ate authentic Mexican food and finished the main hub of the city. When the day was all done, we decided to call it and we went back to the cabin. All these details, they're important to me because I remember the night before so vividly, yet can't remember anything else about this night other than what I'm going to write about. I was in the living room of the cabin, and I remember my mom's boyfriend was there with me. He asked if I wanted to go up into the hunting tower out back, and I innocently said yes. I remember following him through the back door of the living room, and I remember him walking ahead and turning back to wave me towards him. I took it as he was trying to help me keep up and follow him. I watched him climb up the ladder of the hunting tower, and then I heard a voice behind me.
Hey.
My name.
Where are you going?
It was my mom's boyfriend behind me, asking where I was going. I turned back around to look at the hunting tower along the tree line, and no one was there. Nothing was. Not an animal, not my mother, not a specter, nothing. Fast forward a few years ago, my now wife and I are still dating at the time, and we're sharing ghost experiences with one another. And yes, I do have one other ghost experience in my life that I believe to be genuine as well. I told her about this experience in Monterey, and I'll never forget the cold or pale look on her face when I told her. She's from a Mexican family as well, and this legend of the witches of Monterey, it's a very real thing for her as well. The truly scary part, I was telling her this story on a Friday, and according to what her family told her growing up, Friday is a forbidden day to talk about them, because that's the one day of the week they're the most powerful. Apparently, they never forget their prey and use that day as a lure towards what they lost. Initially, I thought, bullshit. But I can't begin to express how many Fridays my wife had to stop me because I had randomly brought up the story on a Friday. Maybe it was subconscious, I don't know. Has anyone ever experienced something like this? If not, I'd still like feedback, comments, concerns. Thanks for reading my story. Almost 10 years ago, my family took a vacation to the Hawaiian Islands, specifically the Big Island. The hotel we stayed at was a nice one. It was a Sheraton hotel, but I know there was another name before it, like Kona or King. But I don't remember anyone telling me or anyone recalling it being haunted or not. Either way, we were there for about 5 days total. On day 3, or night 3, something happened that made the next 2 days a bit different, to say the least. Sleeping got harder and became something I tried in the afternoons. Even then, didn't get much sleep. On the 3rd night, I was with my cousin in the master bedroom of my parents' suite, watching a movie, and at some point, we fell asleep. That night, my parents had essentially given their room or suite to the kids, and the adults were in the adjoining room that my aunt and uncle had reserved. My cousin was still asleep, but I had woken up. It sounded like my little brother and my little cousins had fallen asleep too. I got up and I walked around the room to make sure that everyone was asleep, and I went to turn off the TV in the living room, which was blaring some sort of infomercial. As soon as I shut it off, I heard some sort of soft, muffled sound. It sounded like a group of people. I immediately assumed it was my parents or the adults having a late night, but I hadn't heard them a moment ago in the master bedroom, so I just walked over to the wall that was shared with the other suite, and that's when I saw that it was past 3 a.m. At first, I only thought it was strange that they would be awake so late. But shortly after making it to the wall, I realized the sound had ceased. It was silent throughout both our suite and theirs. But as I walked back to the master bedroom, I heard the low, soft mumble return. And it was as though they were just in the other room, the living room behind me. Turning around, I could see that nothing had changed. No one was awake, and the TV remained off. So I chalked it up to being tired, and I just went back to bed. Possibly someone was around us, neighbors even. As I tried to fall back asleep, I couldn't drown it out. I remember putting a pillow over my head just to try to make the sound go away. Eventually, it must have been even the slightest successful because it was morning. I told my parents about the whole ordeal, and they basically told me that this was a vacation spot. They were sure that it could have been somebody below us even, just younger people having a good time. I didn't agree with them, but what was I going to do about it? That night, I asked my cousin to stay over again. She was for sure more interested in what I had told her than afraid. At least, she didn't dismiss me entirely. So, she stayed and we got to use the living room as our area for the night. My aunt and uncle hosted the younger kids. Because I was so tired, I fell asleep before we could even really start the movie we picked. But I was awoken by my cousin around midnight. She was holding her index finger to her mouth and using her other hand to point to her ear. I listened, and I heard what sounded like whispering. It was close to us, but no one was near us. We laid there, one ear up, and just listened. It was incredibly unsettling. But somehow, my cousin, not being afraid, allowed me to sort of calm down. It was almost the sound of children, but there were so many of them, it was hard to tell if they were all children or some sort of mix of all types of voices. I asked out loud, what could it be? My cousin said, "Ghosts, Kyla. Ghost whispers. I mean, right?" It eventually stopped, and then it would come back. It definitely didn't sound like neighbors. I don't know what it was, but it creeped me out enough to keep me awake. I remember staring at the TV for hours. Random old black and white TV shows just running across the screen. I wasn't really watching as much as keeping myself distracted with the sound and visuals. The last day, I was pretty tired. I thought I would catch up on some sleep before a super fun luau that night. At first, I thought it was just sleepiness or even dreaming a little. I heard loud footsteps. It sounded like someone wearing large, heavy boots or heavy shoes, carrying heavy things. I'd sort of dozed off, but it appeared a few more times. Eventually, I went to shut the door because I wanted to sleep, and I had thought that everybody had been out for a few hours. Closing the door, I realized that I was alone. But suddenly, I feel a bit of air rush towards me. I see the papers on the desk beside me whoosh in the air. I hear what sounds like metal on metal, clashing 3 or 4 times, and then nothing. I had slammed the door almost immediately and was standing on the other side. I really have no idea how to explain that one any better than I just have there. But holy hell, it was incredibly scary. I buried myself in the large bed and mess of comforters, and I tried to get some sleep. That was the last experience I had there, thankfully. I realize all these things happened at times that I was tired, but at a certain point, it feels like you can only blame so much on being tired. Before heading out that night, I couldn't help but notice that none of the windows actually opened in the room. The papers, which had flown about earlier, were still thrown about. My parents had even asked if I'd knocked those over and forgotten to pick them up. No, I hadn't, I told them. But I didn't bother telling them what exactly had. I was still trying to wrap my own head around that idea. So, that's my experience. Has anyone ever had one like it? I'd be so curious to know if I'm alone in this or not.